Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Dispatches. I'm your host, Brady Crytzer. I'll be flying solo today on this Memorial Day weekend to discuss my new article with the Journal of the American Revolution, focusing on President, not General, George Washington and his quest to find a leader for America's first true United States Army. To understand that story, we have to make a little bit of a backtrack to catch up with what was going on in early America and what was going on the frontier. So after the American Revolution, when Americans are celebrating their great victory at Yorktown and the Treaty of Paris of 1783, there's sort of a disconnect between East and West. For those of you that have followed my career or this podcast for any length of time, you know that disconnect between East and West is where I do most of my research. But the primary disconnect is going to be between the terms of the Treaty of Paris, ending the American Revolution, and the way that Great Britain communicated that to their Native American allies in the region of the Great Lakes and what's coming to be called the Northwest Territory. And the way they chose to convey that information, of course, is to not convey that information. When American delegates visited the Northwest Territory, today Ohio specifically, in 1784, they read to Britain's Native American allies, who have been allies really for most of the last 20 years since the French and Indian War, that the American Revolution had ended, the Americans had won, and most disturbingly, the British had essentially gave away all Native American territory in the Northwest. This was news to warriors who had fought for 2 decades, and they were angry about it, as you can imagine. They were skeptical about it, as you can imagine. And almost as soon as the American Revolution ends, a new war begins. This is a war against indigenous nations that doesn't really have a great agreed-upon name, but we've come to call it the Northwest War. The Northwest War was a dangerous and potent war, mostly because of the shifting realities of Native American politics. Most notably that, really for the first time in history, a pan-Indian alliance was formed under the leadership of a few very important individuals. There was, first and foremost, Michikanakwa, Little Turtle of the Miamis. There was Blue Jacket of the Shawnees, and Bukongahelas of the Lenape tribes. And they formed together a coalition of dozens of tribes under the basic idea that even though we are all separate nations with different histories, our war against the United States is a zero-sum game. It's us or them. And that's really a position that Native peoples had not been in before. So what they launched was a series of raids, attacks, and really defensive operations to create a permanent boundary between the United States and Native territory. And that boundary for them was the Ohio River. What this leads to is almost a decade of conflict, war, raids, and destruction on the frontier, while America in the East is celebrating its independence and trying to find its way with Articles of Confederation and Continental Congresses. Life on the frontier for American settlers is quite dangerous and terrible, and the same could be said for Native Americans as well. That will lead President George Washington in 1790 to send a force of troops under the command of a general named Josiah Harmer into what is today Ohio to try and suppress this Western Confederacy led by Little Turtle, Blue Jacket, and Bukongahelas. Harmer's army will be destroyed, defeated badly, and as a result, the reputation of Josiah Harmer, who was a pretty good revolutionary general, really takes a serious beating. He's accused of being a drunkard. He's accused of being negligent. None of that was true at the time, although he did like to take a drink. There was no evidence he was drinking at the time of the battle. And this battle in Ohio doesn't really have a name. Many have called it the Battle of Pumpkin Fields, because one of the onlookers said that when they returned to retrieve the bodies of the fallen American soldiers, steam rose from their scalped heads like steam off of a field of pumpkins in the morning. Very kind of gruesome stuff. Well, in 1791, it's going to get a lot worse because George Washington will respond as president with a larger military force, this time under the command of the governor of the Northwest Territory, Arthur St. Clair. And it will be a hodgepodge of state militiamen that had been stationed on the Ohio River that take this undertaking on. And they will march once again into Ohio to try and strike at what is considered to be the center or the operational headquarters of the new Western Confederacy, this large, massive native village on the Ohio-Indiana border called Kikianga. That will be a disaster as well, because before Arthur St. Clair's men can really get anywhere close to their destination, Little Turtles and Blue Jackets warriors will devastate them along the Wabash River at a battle we call the Battle of the Wabash. The defeat is so bad, it still stands as the single worst defeat in the history of the American military. And as a result, Arthur St. Clair is court-martialed after the event. He's also put under congressional investigation, the first congressional investigation in American history. What we need to know about this is that for President George Washington, this is all bad news. And by the way, if you want to learn this full story, I have some insider knowledge. In 2027, a new book about this will be coming out, of course, by yours truly, but that's just between you and I, listeners of Dispatches. George Washington needs a lot of things, and one of the problems he faces is that he doesn't truly have a United States Army at his disposal. He's got regiments, but they are very almost skeleton crew kind of regiments. And the reason is because for a lot of different reasons, really. The big one was many Americans are skeptical of a big standing army. They don't like it. They're afraid of it. The British had one, and look how that went. So Washington has to sort of massage an army, a true standing army, into existence. And by 1792, the pressure is on to do so, because we have settlements in what is today the Northwest Territory, Ohio. If you've read David McCullough's masterful book, The Pioneers, you know that story. They are demanding protection. And they are, giving the Congress a lot of money for these land settlements. And they're threatening to pull those funds. So Washington's under a lot of pressure to build this army. So he says, well, let's do it. And he teams up with War Secretary Henry Knox. And they come up with a plan for a new army. And it's an army that Henry Knox will describe as a legion. That's very interesting. Now, obviously, you follow the American Revolution. You've heard that term legion before. Tarleton's Legion, right? We hear these kind of things. Legion was an old throwback to the ancient Romans. Because truth be told, the revolutionary generation was obsessed with ancient Rome. They all were, but especially Henry Knox. How obsessed was he with ancient Rome? Well, this new Legion of the United States, they were going to call it, was modeled almost exactly off of Julius Caesar's Roman legions, even down to the man, 5,120 men in one legion of Roman soldiers. Well, that's exactly how many Henry Knox put into the new Legion of the United States, this specialized new armed force to fight the Western, the Western Confederacy. So my new article is about how you'll find a leader for that new army. It's really in 1792, George Washington's big pressing issue. Who will lead this Legion of the United States? The Legion is going to be interesting. It's going to take components of 18th century warfare that are usually compartmentalized and separate. Heavy infantry, light infantry, cavalry, and artillery. And it's going to combine them into one strike force. Very innovative and very adept for fighting on the frontier. But again, who will lead them? Well, President Washington in 1792 is going to sit down and make a list. And this is very much in his style. And he's going to list all the pros and cons for all of the front runners for the job. And most of these men are former revolutionary generals. So he's going back to the old bench, right, to see who's waiting that could maybe lead the Legion. And the list is a remarkable piece of material. I'm going to go through it with you now. This is the crux of the article. Because it kind of shows where Washington is, what he thinks of himself, what he thinks of the people that served with him in the Revolution, now 2 decades ago. They're all getting older. Washington himself is losing his eyesight. And these notes are wonderful for so many reasons. They're very honest, sometimes very humorous. But he understood, as a judge of character, this is why we love Washington so much, exactly what he was working with. So, who would lead this new army? I'm going to read these to you so you can see in his words. The first option is Major General Benjamin Lincoln of Massachusetts. Washington writes Lincoln is, quote, sober, honest, brave, and sensible, but infirm, past the vigor of life. You and me both. And reluctantly, if offered to him, would accept the appointment. Lincoln, like Washington, too old. Major General Baron von Steuben, of course, von Steuben from the great history of Valley Forge, the drill master of Valley Forge. Washington writes this: sensible, sober, and brave, well acquainted with tactics and with the arrangement and discipline of an army, high in ideas of subordination, impetuous in his temper, ambitious, and a foreigner. Isn't that something? He lists a dozen wonderful qualities of the Baron von Steuben, but he ends with him being a foreigner, and that's enough to disqualify him in Washington's mind. Major General William Moultrie will go down south. Brave, and it is believed accommodating in his temper. Served the whole of the last war, and has been an officer in the preceding one. At least has been engaged in an expedition against the Cherokees. So that's good when you're fighting a native war. Having defeated them in 1 or 2 considerable actions. What the resources or powers of his mind are, how active he may be, and whether temperate or not, are points I cannot speak to with decision, because I have had little or no opportunities to form an opinion of him. Brigadier General Lachlan McIntosh of Georgia is old and inactive, supposed to be honest and brave, not much known in the Union, and therefore would not obtain much confidence or command of respect, either in the community or the army. McIntosh is out. Major General George Whedon, not supposed to be an officer of much resource, though not deficient of a competent share of understanding, rather addicted to ease and pleasure, and no enemy, it is said, to the bottle. Never has had his name brought forward on this account. Washington has very little patience for alcoholism. You're going to find out. Major General Edward Hand, a sensible and judicious man, his integrity unimpeached, and was esteemed a pretty good officer. But if I recollect rightly, not a very active one. He has never been charged with intemperance to my knowledge. His name has rarely been mentioned under the present difficulty of choosing an officer to command, but this may in a great measure be owing to his being at a distance. Major General Charles Scott, he's been tangling with the Western Confederacy from Kentucky. Washington writes, brave and means well, but is an officer of inadequate abilities for extensive command, and by report is addicted to drinking. Major General Jedediah Huntington, sober, sensible, and very discreet, has never discovered much enterprise yet, no doubt has ever been entertained of his want of spirit or firmness. Brigadier General James Wilkinson, might be best to avoid this one, is by brevet senior to those names follow, but the appointment to this rank was merely honorary. And as he was but a short time in service, little can be said of his abilities as an officer. He is lively, sensible, pompous, and ambitious, but whether sober or not is unknown to me. And as it turns out, of course, we know General James Wilkinson was a spy for the Spanish Empire, nearly brokering a deal to sell Kentucky to the Spanish if it wasn't doomed to fail. Brigadier General Mordecai Gist Little has ever been said of his qualifications as a general officer. His activity and attention to duty is somewhat doubtful, though his spirit, I believe, is unimpeached. Brigadier General William Irvine, the Pennsylvanian, is sober, tolerably sensible, and prudent. It is said he is an economist and supported his authority whilst he was entrusted with a separate command. But I have no recollection of any circumstance that marks him as a decidedly good or indifferent officer. Now we'll get to the good stuff. Brigadier General Daniel Morgan has been fortunate and has met with acclaim. Yet there are different opinions with respect to his abilities as an officer. He is accused of using improper means to obtain certificates from soldiers. It is said that he has been intemperate, that he is troubled with a palpitation which often lays him up, and it is not denied that he is illiterate. Washington taking some shots there at Morgan's intelligence. Brigadier General Rufus Putnam, of course, of Boston, Massachusetts, possesses a strong mind and is a discreet man. No question has ever been made, that comes to my knowledge, of his want of firmness. In short, there is nothing conspicuous in his character, and he is but little known out of his own state and a narrow circle. I think it's a pretty good assessment of him. Brigadier General Thomas Pinckney, a colonel since September 16th, 1776, but appointed a brigadier by brevet at the close of the war only. In this gentleman, many valuable qualities are to be found. He is of unquestionable bravery, is a man of strict honor, erudition, and good sense, and it is said that he has made tactics a study. But what his spirit for enterprise is, whether active or indolent, never having had any opportunity to form a judgment of his talents as a military character. The capture of Charleston put an end to his military service, but his junior rank, and being little known in this part of the Union, are the two considerations most opposed to him, particularly the latter, as it is more than probable his being a prisoner prevented his promotion, which ought not to bar him from his ranking as a brigadier from the time that others of his standing as a colonel were promoted. Finally, we're going to take a look at this candidate, Major General Anthony Wayne. History records him as Mad Anthony Wayne, but more active and more appropriately at the time, he was called Dandy Tony for his love of fine dress. Washington writes, more active and enterprising than judicious and cautious. No economist, it is feared. Open to flattery, vain, easily imposed upon, and liable to be drawn into scrapes. Too indulgent, the effect perhaps of some of the causes just mentioned, to his officers and men. Whether sober or a little addicted to the bottle, I not know. Well, in the end, President George Washington will select General Anthony Wayne to lead his new Legion of the United States, and it's, as history records, the right call. Wayne is a good officer. He is vain. He is a little bit bold, a little dashing. He's a little bit of George Armstrong Custer, just a few generations too early. But he's the perfect leader to fight Michiganaqua and the Western Confederacy because he meets them on the field of battle, a little bit antagonistic, and defeats them. He also makes a move on the British forts still located on the Great Lakes and actually tries to intimidate them out of position as well. As it turned out, he was the perfect decision for the time, at least as far as the outcome goes, and he was a pretty handy diplomat in the aftermath of the conflict. He negotiated the Treaty of Greenville in 1796, which gave the United States full control, nearly, over what would be the state of Ohio. So I like this episode. I know it's a little bit saucy, but sometimes we have to hear directly from the horse's mouth to see what George Washington is thinking, what the challenges he faces after the Revolution are, and how the Revolution still plays a tremendous role in that. As always, thank you for listening. We'll catch you next week. I'm Brady Crytzer, and this is Dispatches.